Lethal Company is, in my opinion, one of the best indie horror games to have come out recently. It has an excellent mix of both horror and comedy, having an atmosphere which can be scary if you're alone, but as soon as you're near other people, it becomes a far sillier game. The monster designs also border on silly despite how creepy some of them look, and the actual gameplay loop is so simple, making both the horror and comedy land better. The comedy is another big reason why I think Lethal Company works so well, both from the game itself having a lot of funny items and mechanics, and from the stupid bits that have spawned from me and my friends playing together.
Oh my god, don't go that way, don't go that way, oh my god. Oh my god.
Obviously that last point is way more subjective than the rest, but there's still something to be said about the inherent silliness of the game. There's more I could say about why I think Lethal Company works so well, but I think that's best saved for another time. Besides, this isn't a video about Lethal Company. This is a video about the games it inspired. Lethal Company clones, Friendslop, Lethal Likes, whatever you want to call them, are a really interesting subgenre of game to me. Depending on your definition, they can either be games clearly inspired by Lethal Company with similar formats, or they can be games that at best were inspired by its use of proximity chat, having no other similarities other than co-op game with voice chats. That would be games like Peak, Mage Arena, Are We There Yet, or the countless co-op proximity chat games that I swear to God come out like every week. Those games, with some exceptions which I'll talk about later, are generally a bit more sloppy, as the name would suggest, but I think they still have their merits. What I'd like to instead focus on is games more clearly inspired by Lethal Company, or, in some cases, inspired by the games inspired by Lethal Company. In simpler terms, 4-player co-op horror games with some sort of comedic elements, usually with a gameplay loop that doesn't end until you and your friends all die. There's two main things I want to focus on with these games: if they're any good, and how they set themselves apart from Lethal Company or any of the other bigger Friendslop games. I know that last part might not sound too important, but there is a big reason why I'm going to factor that in, which you'll see later. Now, obviously, I'm not going to call a game bad just for taking inspiration from something. There's nothing wrong with being inspired by something. I just think with these kinds of games in particular, it's important to be distinct. A lot of the games I didn't include in this video were for that reason of not being distinct enough, the Headliners being a great example. I haven't played this one since it looks really bad, and I'm not going to spend $30 on 4 copies of it for me and my friends. It also just seems way too similar to Content Warning, don't worry, I'll go over Content Warning in a minute, for me to warrant including it. So basically, what I'm saying is, if I don't cover your favorite Friendslop game in this video, it's probably because I didn't think it was unique enough to cover. Or I didn't know about it, that's honestly more likely. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get right into the first game.
Close it! Oh my god! Help me!
I'm pretty sure this is the first Lethal Company clone I knew about, and I'd wager it's one of, if not the first, to get major attention. I'd wager that's in no small part because of the game being temporarily free on the day it came out. I mean, that's how I got it. Now, despite getting Content Warning for free, I'm going to treat it as if I didn't. So, as an $8 game, is Content Warning any good?
Yeah.
I'll be fully transparent with you, I went into this playthrough of Content Warning expecting not to like it. I didn't like it that much when it first came out, but I was pleasantly surprised by how well the game had been updated. Before I get into what I like and don't like about Content Warning though, let me give you a brief rundown of the gameplay. Unlike in a more traditional Lethal Company clone, Content Warning sees you and up to 3 friends going underground to get footage of monsters for SpookTube videos. You start out with only a camera and some flashlights, but with money, you can buy other pieces of film equipment like boom mics, soundboards, and clickers. So basically, you're actively trying to look for monsters to get more views, and anything else you do is also in service of just getting more views. I think this formula is great, and it doesn't really feel like Lethal Company aside from being a co-op proximity chat horror game, but I do have some issues with it. For starters, if you don't find any monsters, which is a lot more common than you would think, you're kinda fucked. This is way less of an issue now than it used to be, but I distinctly remember not finding any monsters on a day being a death sentence. You needed to make every second count, and you still kind of do, which makes it hard to do anything funny in the videos aside from just run away from monsters. Like I said though, this issue seems to have been sort of fixed, at least to an extent. Me and my friends were able to make it just under the second quota, despite not getting any footage on one of the 3 days, which is way better than how it used to be. My other main issue was the map, as unlike pretty much every other Lethal-like, Content Warning doesn't have a randomly generated map. It's one of the same 3 places every time, you just spawn in different spots. While this is a really cool idea, and the maps are huge, making it unlikely you'd get the exact same spot twice in a row, I kinda wish there was more variation. Yeah, the way it works now is good for finding your old camera, should you die and lose it, but that's pretty much the only benefit. The last thing I don't like is that despite all the updates, Content Warning ironically doesn't seem to have much content in it. There's a good amount of monsters, and from what I can tell, a lot more stuff you can spend your money on, but that's pretty much it. While I did find myself enjoying Content Warning a lot more this time around, I still got bored of it after about an hour of playing. Still though, an hour of playtime isn't that bad, especially since I can see myself playing this game again in the future. Let's move over to the positives now, since I have a lot I want to go over. First, the art style. While the art style in the surface area isn't anything too interesting for a game like this, I do think the black and white style they go for when you go underground is really cool. It reminds me a lot of the art of Junji Ito, maybe just because it's black and white with heavy shading, but I wouldn't be shocked if there was at least a little inspiration from his work. Probably isn't though. Regardless, the art style is easily my favorite part of Content Warning. It's unique, and it makes the monsters look terrifying under the right conditions. That's another thing I do really like with the game. All the monsters I encountered both on this most recent playthrough and my past experiences with the game are fun to deal with. I'm sure there's more obnoxious ones the game throws at you later, but for the most part, they're all able to be outran or avoided easily enough, while still being threatening due to their designs. Anyway, as I said previously, I do also really enjoy the gameplay loop and how it actually encourages you to go and find monsters. This is probably why the enemies aren't as strong as they are in other Friendslop games, as you need to actually be able to get close to these guys so you can make a good video. Like I said earlier, pretty much every mechanic actually ties back into the whole make a funny video idea, which makes it so that even if there isn't actually that much to this game, it never feels completely boring. In short, Content Warning is good. I don't know if it's really worth $8 because of how bare bones it can feel, but when it works, it really works. Everything ties together nicely to create a fun gameplay loop, the game has an interesting art style, and I actually feel like there's good reason to play it over Lethal Company, at least for a little bit. I can't stress enough though that it does get boring a little quickly, at least for me, which is why I can't fully recommend this one. Still, I think Content Warning is a game that's worth trying out at least once.
So if you pull this trigger, it turns on.
Of all the Lethal Company clones I've played, REPO is the one I've put the most hours into. Still, I wanted to include it in this video because I really like this one. I'd describe REPO as being Lethal Company but with a Gmod fizz gun, which I think is a fantastic concept. The way it's used too helps REPO feel distinct from Lethal Company, even if it has a similar structure, though I think REPO also differentiates itself by leaning more towards comedy than other Friendslop games. Although, I do think some of REPO's enemies can be genuinely scary under the right conditions, especially this fucking thing, but the majority look pretty silly. And coupled with the goofy designs of the robots you play as, it makes REPO a generally comedic game. I don't think that's a bad thing at all though, as like I said, it really helps REPO stand out from other games in the genre. Sure, other games I'll talk about later also lean more comedic than scary, but REPO can be silly and genuinely scary, at least to me. There's been many times, including on this most recent playthrough, that I've been left alone in the dark, knowing that I had to somehow avoid the monsters that can easily kill me if I'm not careful, and that's great. The fact that REPO, despite how silly it looks, is still able to be an effective horror game is a sign that the developers actually understood what made Lethal Company work so well. While I'm on the subject of the monsters though, they are my biggest issue with the game. Now, I don't think any of them are really all that bad, except maybe the balloon boy, he kinda sucks, but it is boring having the solution for escaping pretty much all of them just be tumble or hide under a table every single time. Yeah, sure, if they see you hide under a table, they can still kill you, and as you can see in this clip, it is possible to still outsmart the AI even if it sees you hide. While that is cool, it doesn't change that there's no real variation on how to deal with threats. I mean, there is one other way, which I'll go over in just a minute, but I digress. The only other big issue I have with the game is the difficulty, as this is by far one of the hardest Friendslop games I've ever played. Most monsters kill you in 2 to 3 hits, which can make them feel a bit unfair to go against, and while you do heal in between rounds, provided you're alive, the difficulty is still crazy high. This also makes it a bit harder to get into the later game content, like the moon phases, which makes the game feel a little more repetitive than I think it really is. Those are my only real complaints with REPO though, as I do think this game is great. Being able to buy upgrades for your robot alongside items allows for fun builds like full strength, allowing you to just grab and beat the shit out of most enemies. I also really like the tumble upgrades, since you can launch yourself super far, which is really funny to me. The last thing I want to talk about though is the actual gameplay of grabbing stuff, which I think is done phenomenally. The fizz gun feels great to use, and there's a lot of items that you have to grab in different ways, like the music box which makes you spin, the hourglass which slows you and your voice down, or the traffic light which explodes if you hold it on the red lights. These make it so you're not just mindlessly grabbing stuff and putting it in the carts, which can make the game feel much more intense when you're trying to just quickly grab stuff while an enemy is after you. That's pretty much all I have to say about REPO though, as I really do think it's a great game. I think it has enough going for it that I can safely consider it not just a Lethal Company clone, but a game that can stand alongside it. There's a good reason why it's become one of the most popular Friendslop games, and I definitely recommend checking it out. I do still think it could use some work, but updates are pretty frequent, so I think a lot of the things I don't like or think could be made better, like the difficulty, could easily get better later. I mean, I'm pretty sure enemies being able to see you hide under stuff is a newer change. I don't remember them doing that before, and while it is a little annoying that they do it now, I think it is overall a good change. So, as long as REPO keeps making good changes like that, I think it's safe to say it's one of the best the co-op horror genre has to offer. I want to pivot away from more well-known Lethal Company clones and talk about some lesser-known ones. Of all the games I'm including, I'd guess that these next two you've probably never heard of, and I was fully prepared for this to be the negative section of the video. Especially since I had played both of these games before working on this video, and at the time, they felt extremely bare bones, and the most straight-up clones of Lethal Company. And unfortunately, that's still how I feel about Pit of Goblin. I first played this game last November after my cousin recommended it to me, and I only got it for, I think, around $1 or $2, so I wasn't too upset at its lackluster gameplay. Still, I had high hopes that it would be improved with updates, and after seeing that it got a new update, I decided to check it out. And none of my issues with the game were fixed. I'll start with the things I do like though, just to be fair. For starters, I do like the whole goblin theming the game has. The goblins themselves are pretty cute, and I like how customizable they are, especially after the newest updates. The art style also isn't too bad. I do think it is kinda generic, especially for the Friendslop genre, but I think it works for what this game is trying to do. I don't think Pit of Goblin is really trying to be a horror game, so these more cartoony graphics work for the sillier intent I think it's going for. That sillier intent extends to the main point of the game, being a group of disposable goblins sent to get food for the King Queen, or else they get eaten. Like I said before, this really isn't a bad concept, and I think if Pit of Goblin allowed for more players, like around 8 maybe, then it would be a lot better. But unfortunately, it's only 4 players. And this is just the beginning of how disappointed I am with this game. For me, one of the biggest issues of the game is how infrequent food is. For a game like this, where you're pretty much just grabbing whatever you can and leaving, Pit of Goblin has barely any item spawns. Now, there is a chance that maybe I just got really unlucky here and this isn't an actual problem with the game. I do remember having runs where it was a little easier to find food, so I'll say there is a decent chance that food spawns are just down to luck. However, that doesn't change anything about the biggest issue I think Pit of Goblin has, which is the entire reason I don't think the game is good. The enemy spawns. So, you know how in Lethal Company, enemies spawn more frequently the later in the day it gets? Pit of Goblin kind of does the same thing, but it has no visible timer. Sure, Lethal Company's is only visible half the time, but it's also pretty generous with how much time you have before you start getting screwed over. Now, take a look at this clip from my last time playing Pit of Goblin. Notice how there's like 4 different enemies back to back? This was only a few minutes into the run. We just spawned in. What makes this worse is that most enemies are invincible, faster than the player, and kill you in like 2 to 3 hits, or stun lock you. Yeah, you can fight back, but what's the point if you drop your weapon and get stun locked if you get hit? What's the point if the enemies can't be killed or hidden from? I don't have issue with a lethal-like being hard. Despite my issues with REPO's difficulty, I actually don't mind it too much, but this is absurd. I only played 1 quota on this run-through of Pit of Goblin, yet this is the kind of difficulty I would expect from late game, not on the first quota of a new save. What makes matters worse is the pitiful amount of stamina the goblins have, as from my testing, running from one end of the elevator bucket thing to the other takes half your stamina. It's not even that big, so imagine how bad the stamina is when you're trying to run from an enemy. Maybe if you could actually hide, I wouldn't really have an issue with this, and the most success I had avoiding enemies was when I could actually hide. But notice how this enemy, which doesn't even have eyes by the way, saw me and killed me because I had no way to outrun or hide from it. Personally, I don't think that's very good design. I don't like calling things objectively bad or good in my videos, because my videos are opinions and therefore can't be objective. But come on, this is bad design, and I don't think most people would argue against that. There's so many other things I really don't like about this game. The controls feel weird, especially the useless flop button which feels lifted from REPO. The game is super dark, even with a torch, which makes it not fun to navigate, and the items have their names and uses hidden from you until you buy them. That last one is a newer change, by the way, because I remember from when I played back in November, it didn't do that. Pit of Goblin is actively getting worse with the updates, and that is the last thing I want to see out of a game like this. Really, its only saving grace is that it's cheap, but even for a game this cheap, you have better options. If you're desperate for a cheap 4-player co-op game, just get Left 4 Dead on sale, because that'll save you $5 and is a far better experience than this. I know that's a completely different genre of game, but still, there's far better options than this. Pit of Goblin, to me, feels like a game made by people who wanted to make the next Lethal Company, but didn't understand anything about what made Lethal Company good. They lifted the main gameplay loop, added some new mechanics to be funny, like being able to light yourself on fire, which I found super annoying, and made the rest of the game extremely half-baked. For a game that's been in early access with semi-consistent updates for almost 2 years, I expect it to be better than this. I know it probably has a really small dev team, but so does every other game I'm talking about in this video. Those games are getting better with time, but Pit of Goblin isn't. Don't let me stop you from trying the game though. I personally don't think Pit of Goblin is any good from the roughly 4 hours I played, but there's always a chance that I missed something or was doing something wrong. I mean, I did originally think the game had an issue of not making it clear how you're supposed to feed the King-Queen, but I realized that was entirely a skill issue. So, maybe my other complaints are as well. Regardless, I personally have no desire to play this game ever again, since I just found it to be a worse version of Lethal Company. Like I said earlier, I was fully expecting that this part of the video would be negative. And while I still don't really like Pit of Goblin very much, I was actually really pleasantly surprised by Murky Divers. But before I get too much into that, let me tell you what this game's even about. Basically, it's Underwater Lethal Company. You and your friends are a group of divers working for Pharma Corp, and you're sent to clean up their mess. That mess is finding whatever dead body parts are scattered across the map, while avoiding monsters and police. What makes Murky Divers stand apart from every other game in this video, though, is that it's split into two distinct sections: the submarine section and the exploration section. The exploration section is exactly what you would expect, but the submarine section has you controlling the sub to find the expedition sites you explore, and I actually really like them. Every person controls part of the sub. One person steers, one person scans the surroundings, one person sees what those surroundings are, and one person controls the speed. I think there might be more stuff you can do, like fire weapons, but you have to unlock those with batteries, and I only managed to find one on my brief playthrough. Even if these are the only things you can do though, I really like this part of the game. It reminds me a lot of Sea of Thieves, where everybody on your crew has a different part of the ship to control, and that is absolutely a good thing to be reminding me of. As I mentioned a second ago, the gameplay of the expedition sites is pretty much just Underwater Lethal Company. You go around and find items to bring back to your ship, but unlike in Lethal Company, your quota is per level. You don't have a set amount of days to hit quota. You have to do it in 1 day. However, failing to reach quota isn't an automatic loss. All it does is up your wanted level, and if that wanted level hits 6 stars, the game ends with your crew being arrested. This system was my biggest issue with Murky Divers when I first played it, because I remember the wanted level going up fast. You had to find pretty much every single piece of evidence to not increase the level, and it would usually increase by 1 to 2.5 stars every single time. However, on my most recent playthrough, I noticed that it was way easier to find body parts, and you needed far less to succeed. Not finding enough body parts usually only made it go up by at most 1 star, and the only time I ever got more than 1 star was due to somebody dying and not having their body recovered. So, with that issue fixed, is there anything about Murky Divers gameplay that I don't like? Well, unfortunately I don't love the controls. They're perfectly fine, they work, but they don't feel great to me. Particularly having to drop your tool item to actually use it instead of just being able to swap to it in a hotbar was kinda weird. I get why it was like that though, as there was a moment where I wanted to use my taser, and I had to scramble to get it, which made things way more tense. That's pretty much my only issue with the gameplay though, and even then, I don't think the controls of Murky Divers are bad. They're just a little weird, which is something I could easily get used to. There's way more stuff I could go over, like the weird ass eldritch creature I found, which gave my crew some random buff and debuff, the cool environments, especially Atlantis and the sunken ship, and the nice balance of silly and creepy looking enemies. But I really think this is a game you should check out. I would say Murky Divers leans more towards the comedy end of the comedy horror spectrum, but as someone who finds ocean stuff to be sometimes terrifying, I still think this is a pretty effective horror game. Definitely not the scariest game in this video, not even close, but I don't know. Being alone in a cramped underwater room with the only way out being to swim in an extremely awkward way kinda got to me. Anyway, yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about Murky Divers. The only real issue I have with it is that it is still really hard, but I don't think that's that big of a deal. It's a fun enough game that I could easily see myself coming back to, and while I am a little worried after enough time it would get repetitive, I don't think that's that huge of a deal either. I remember when I first played it back in 2024, it was kind of repetitive, but there's been so much added since, I doubt it still is. Regardless, Murky Divers really surprised me with how good it is. Like I said, it's a game I can easily see myself playing again in the future, and if my only concern is that it might get boring and repetitive after playing it for way more time, then I think it's probably good. Definitely recommend checking this one out if you have the time.
It's so sad that Steve Jobs died of Ignis.
I feel really conflicted about Yapyap. I do like it, but I think it heavily suffers from not having a ton of content. Let me clarify, when I talk about a lack of content in games like Content Warning or Yapyap, I don't mean it necessarily as a bad thing. It's not great, and I do think it makes games feel more repetitive than they actually are, but any game will get repetitive if you play it enough. Friendslop games just especially suffer from this, especially when they don't have a ton of content. Content Warning just barely has enough so I can ignore it. Murky Divers seems like it probably has enough for me to be able to ignore it, but Yapyap, as of now, unfortunately doesn't. Now, with that in mind, what even is Yapyap anyway? Basically, it's a co-op quote-unquote horror game where you play as some wizard gremlin creatures and vandalize a wizard tower. I say horror in quotes because this is one of the games I'll talk about that is the least concerned with being horror. There's a couple enemies that look a bit freaky, the spider being the main one, but maybe that's just my own fear of spiders talking, but that's pretty much it. You can also pretty easily fight back against monsters in this one, and they for the most part are more of an annoyance than anything. There are a couple that seem more like proper threats, like the spider, but I'll go over that more in a second. Let me first go over what I don't like, since I do ultimately believe that Yapyap isn't bad. My biggest issue is the price tag and how little content there is in the game. Yapyap's main gimmick is using your voice to cast spells, and the spells you have access to depend on what wands you have equipped. For example, with the wind wand, you can say up dog and start flying, or with the grotesque wand, you can say piss yuck and, well, start pissing. This is a really fun mechanic, and the extra spells you can unlock with the grimoire are a fun way to add a little more depth. The issue is, though, there's not many wands to choose from. There's only 9, one of them only having a singular spell, and from the ones I used, there doesn't seem to be much reason to choose one over another. Wands like the Minor Arcanes and Astral Wand don't seem super useful, and wands like the Wind and Blessed Wand only have one real use, traversal and healing respectively. From the other ones I used, the Grotesque, Fire, and Telekinesis ones seemed the most fun and unique, and while I do still think overall the mechanic is great, I just wish there were more options. Moving over to the enemies and map of the game, from what I played, there wasn't too much variety in enemies, and there's only one map which isn't even procedurally generated. This sucks. While I do like the visuals of the one map the game has, and I do like the enemies that I did see, none of them felt super impactful. Maybe it's just because of how generally easy this game is, enemies never chase you that far, and it's absurdly easy to hit the first 2 quotas, but the only enemy I encountered that seemed like a real threat was the spider. I've seen some stuff about a jester enemy who I assume is supposed to be the most dangerous in the game, so from my experience, the lack of enemy variety and the lack of any that feels super dangerous is a slight issue. For the record, the only times I died were due to me killing myself by launching a frog into myself and jumping down a pit. I did almost die a couple times to enemies, but I managed to live because they usually just left. The last issue I have with Yapyap is the lack of a clear tutorial. I know there's a couple signs in the lobby, and I personally didn't have issue with this because I played the demo, but some of my friends did not. So, for them, they had trouble with not knowing they were supposed to make it to extraction at the end of the night. They had trouble with knowing what to do in the first place. And honestly, I remember having the exact same concerns when I played the demo. I also had the same issues I do now, lack of content and replayability, on top of spells not registering roughly half the time. Thankfully that last issue has been fixed, and I don't doubt the others will be eventually, but that's the thing. Yapyap, as it is currently, I don't think is worth the $10 price tag. I had fun with it, and I have played it a couple times since writing the majority of this section, but I don't see myself playing it a ton until more updates come out. With all that said though, I do want to briefly go over what I like about Yapyap. Despite the lack of variety, the main spellcasting gameplay is really fun, and I especially really like the secret spells unlockable in the grimoire. The way some spells combine, particularly a chew and piss yuck on the grotesque wand, is really cool, Unfortunately, I didn't see too many spells that interacted like that, but the ones that did interact were great. Circling back to what I said about Yapyap not being very horror focused though, I do think what is there is done well. The enemies lean more weird or imposing than anything, but the atmosphere of the game itself is decently eerie. Nothing too scary, even when I'm alone I'm not scared because this game has a fucking piss wand, so I can't take it that seriously. But still, definitely eerie. That atmosphere is also enhanced by the excellent visual style of the game, which isn't like anything else I played for this video. It's not really going for the usual PS1 style these games have, but it still has a low poly aesthetic with some really messed up looking player models, in a good way. I like how their mouths look way too realistic, how big their eyes are, how their heads glow when they talk, and I like the mix of high quality cloth physics and low poly models. It's a little so retro, but I don't know, I kinda like it. The comedy part of Yapyap is also mostly understated, with the funniest things being the aforementioned piss wand and saying stuff like updog or ignis balls to cast spells. I think the humor being ingrained in the spells, but not much else, is actually to the game's benefit, though it definitely helps that its sense of humor aligns close to my own. So, ultimately, do I recommend Yapyap? Depends. If you get it on sale, then absolutely. And maybe eventually I'd even recommend it full price, but as of now, I can't. I know there's definitely more to the game, I only barely mess with the potion crafting in the basement, but there doesn't seem to be too much more. I hope one day there is, but as of now, Yapyap's biggest issue is that it feels underdeveloped. I really do hope that changes though, because I think this game is fun and has huge potential. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if it lives up to it. Okay, let's talk about a bad game again. I'm going to try to keep this section as brief as possible because I truly can't find anything redeeming about ZORT, both as a lethal-like and as a game in general. The only things I like about it are that the name is kind of funny to say, and I thought there were some cute Easter eggs in the lobby, like snow angels and being able to throw snowballs at people. But as for the actual game, it's one of the most creatively bankrupt, unfun games I have ever played. Let's start with the gameplay. ZORT is more of a mascot horror game structurally than a lethal-like, which I think could work if this wasn't bad. I mean, it controls fine, but everything in the game just feels so quote-unquote inspired by other things that nothing feels original. I know, originality isn't everything, but when the main gameplay is the most cookie-cutter, run away from scary monster and do puzzles a baby could solve, I'm forced to analyze the monsters and mechanics of the game, which are just inferior versions of other games. If you've seen my Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion video, then you'll know that game also doesn't have very complicated gameplay, and it also takes heavy inspiration from horror media that came before it. However, the difference between Spooky's and ZORT, at least in my opinion, is that Spooky's wears its inspiration on its sleeve. It never hides the fact that, for example, the nurse is based on Silent Hill, or that the ghost girl is based on The Ring. ZORT, on the other hand, does not feel like it's simply taking inspiration, at least not out of a love for what came before it. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at the monsters and mechanics of Chapter 1. I'm told the noise machine at the start of the game, which is completely useless outside of the first puzzle by the way, is lifted from FNAF's Security Breach. The main enemy looks like a Poppy Playtime reject, there's the spiders from KLETKA, Slender Man, an extremely annoying sanity mechanic trying to be Amnesia, another monster that looks like Shadow Bonnie, and mimics that don't even functionally mimic your voice half the time. There's also, of course, holes that take you to the back rooms, for no reason. Because of course there is. The backrooms area also chugs your frame rate, and I genuinely have no clue why, but to me, it's another sign that this game was poorly put together. All of those mechanics and enemies I just mentioned have absolutely zero depth outside of their surface level appearances. I'm not saying these mechanics should have a ton of depth, that would be unrealistic for how many there are, I'm saying there's too many in the game. Chapter 2 tones things down by having everything pretty much just rip off regular show, You have the park, the house, the evil taxi from that one episode, and the ending feels like something that would happen in regular show, but I haven't seen most of the series in a while, so I don't remember. I will say though, Chapter 2 was ever so slightly better, but it still has extremely basic gameplay. There's like 3 different chase scenes where all you do is just hold forward. You don't even need to actually follow the path, it does that for you. Present in both chapters is the issue of how unfunny ZORT is, which I know is an extremely subjective point, but everyone I've talked to who's played this game agrees that it's not funny, so take that as you will. Anyway, this game's idea of humor is just slapping random funny fan art of its characters on the wall, or making references to children's media, both of which reminds me a lot of awful Roblox games. And that's pretty much what ZORT is. However, if it was a Roblox game, I probably wouldn't mind it as much. I could excuse the basic gameplay, how unoriginal it is, and the unfunny humor. I expect those things in a free Roblox horror game. But that's not what ZORT is. It's a $4 game on Steam. Okay, now, I'll be nice for a second. Like I said, humor is absurdly subjective, so while I find ZORT to be absurdly cringy, other people might not. Let's talk about something that's a lot less subjective though, that being how poorly the game is made. You remember that sanity mechanic I talked about? So, if your sanity gets too low, you start hallucinating. Sounds pretty normal, and if the hallucinations weren't just generic pictures of scary eyeballs or whatever, I probably wouldn't even mind it. What I do mind though, is the fact that the only way to stop going insane is by using a Rubik's Cube. One that can stop working for 0 reason. One that you might only be able to find one of, if at all. Because you know what else happens if you get too insane? The game starts hiding items from you. And it becomes extremely dark, making it hard to tell what's even going on, which is really bad if you are under a strict time limit, like at the end of Chapter 1. I know, good chance this was just a skill issue, but I think this is just bad implementation. And that's how I feel about every mechanic in ZORT. They're so basic, I'm talking like Garden of Banban levels of basic here, and they just feel like they were thrown in because the devs thought it would be cool. If the game itself wasn't super basic and easy, I'm not joking, Chapter 1 took me like 10 minutes once I knew what I was doing, then I wouldn't care. But as a whole, ZORT has no depth. Yeah, it has 3 chapters, so for $4 it's not completely a waste of money, but 2 of those 3 chapters are super short, boring, and unfunny romps that I would never want to experience again. I will say Chapter 3 looks a little better, but with how bad I found Chapter 1 and 2 to be, I'd rather not play it. Maybe I will one day, but for now, I'd rather stay as far away from ZORT as possible. Of all the games I played for this video, KLETKA is the only one I knew nothing about. All I knew was its concept, that being Soviet lethal company with a living elevator. But honestly, I think this game is so far removed from the Lethal Company format that it barely even counts as a clone. Though, unlike Peak, I think there's enough obvious influence for me to still include it. Anyway, what did I think after playing KLETKA?
I liked it.
Yeah, so this game's good. It's up there with REPO and Murky Divers as my favorite games that I've played for this video, and that's because of how unique it feels. Sure, visually it's nothing special, just another PS1 styled indie horror game, but gameplay-wise, it's a whole lot more unique. KLETKA has more of a goal-oriented gameplay loop. You're not just trying to survive as long as possible, you're trying to reach the bottom of the gigastructure where the heart lies. Along the way you have to keep your living elevator, the titular KLETKA, alive by repairing it, filling it with fuel, and feeding it. Food can be found on floors, but you can also destroy the corpses of enemies and your friends for extra food, which I found to be really cool. It helps that the enemies are actually possible to kill, aside from a few which are pretty obviously meant to be avoided, making KLETKA feel more like a proper survival horror game where you have to pick your battles. There's even some boss fights, and while the one I fought was kinda lame in my opinion, I do like that there's bosses in the game. I don't know how good the others are, but the one I fought was this worm where you had to throw bombs into it. Perfectly fine boss, I just didn't like how it randomly sped up and insta-killed me. The other thing I really like about KLETKA is the presentation. KLETKA feels the most horror-oriented of the games I've talked about, which is another area that helps it stand apart. The enemies are generally pretty creepy, the only exceptions I saw being the traffic cone spiders and this weird demon girl that had a very interesting design. Even if you do die though, revives are found pretty commonly on floors, meaning you're never out of the action for that long, at least in my experience. The action though, is where I start to have problems with KLETKA. The gameplay loop is good, I do like it, but I can easily see how it would get repetitive. I mean, if you reach the bottom once and beat the game, what reason is there to do it again? There's no real story to the game, just some notes you can find which have vague lore, so it's not like there's more story content. Hopefully in future updates, the first of which might be out by the time this video's done, there is more to do once you beat the game, but as of now, that's the main thing I'm worried about. As I haven't beat the game yet though, I do still have that to work towards. I did notice there also wasn't a huge amount of room variety, but some of that might just be because I didn't get super far into the game. I did some research and saw there were more biomes I didn't see, so there is definitely more to the game, but I'm not sure if there's any real difference in room shapes. I also saw that there were some things called curses, of which I did actually experience a couple on my playthrough. From what I saw, I liked them, and coupled with the special rooms that I don't think I really saw any of, there actually might be a decent amount of variety to the game's floors. That's pretty much all I have to say about KLETKA though. Aside from its lack of replayability, at least as far as I can tell, it's a great game. I like its gameplay loop, its presentation is interesting and unique for the Friendslop genre, and most importantly, I actually enjoyed playing it. I do want to mention that everything I said is going off version 1.0.10, so maybe with future updates, it'll be even better. That's what I'm hoping for, anyway, but I know I'll come back to this one at some point, no matter what. So, for being both a good and a unique game compared to everything else in this video, I think KLETKA is an easy recommendation for me. It's not the best game in the world or anything, but it's a damn solid co-op horror experience. Before I end this video, I want to talk a bit more about what I think makes a good Friendslop game. There's a lot of games I didn't cover, after all, though that's partially because of just how big and frankly undefined the genre of Friendslop really is. That's why I decided to focus more on games that are directly inspired by Lethal Company, as if I went over other Friendslop games like Peak, Are We There Yet, or even Phasmophobia, we'd be here all day. If you include games like that as Friendslop, then the genre is literally just co-op proximity chat games, and that's way too much to cover in roughly a 50-minute video. So, focusing just on Lethal Company clones, what exactly do I think makes a good Friendslop game? As I said in the intro, I think originality and fun are the two most important factors. Obviously, if you want to lean more towards horror, that's fine. I think that works for games like KLETKA and Lethal Company, but these games are usually pretty silly, so it's important to make sure they're fun. I know it's not that important for a horror game to be traditionally fun, but I think it's different for multiplayer games like this. I'd argue that these kinds of games fall apart if you aren't having fun with your friends, though obviously that's kind of ignoring if the games are good in the first place. Let's use Yapyap as an example. The first time I played it with a group of friends who kind of went in not wanting to like it, which I think negatively impacted my experience. However, I later played with a group who actually did want to like it, and that improved my opinion on the game significantly. That brings me to my next point on originality, and this is more of just personal preference than anything. Like, me personally, I don't see any point in playing a Lethal Company clone that's just doing what Lethal Company does. As an example, let's take a brief look at 3 games that, full disclosure, I did not play, but that's because they just looked like worse versions of Lethal Company. Those being Pilgrim, Pony, and We Gotta Go. From the trailers and what I've been told about them by friends who did play them, except We Gotta Go, that one isn't out yet, they just look like Lethal Company, but slightly different. That's not interesting to me, and in the case of Pony, I heard it was also completely broken, since there was way too many enemy spawns. Honestly, I was only interested in that one because it's a fucking My Little Pony infection AU theme lethal-like, and that's a really funny concept to me. Anyway, I'm sure these games have slightly more unique mechanics in them, but I still didn't think they seemed unique enough for me to cover more in depth. Let's actually go back to Murky Divers for a second, as while I did call it just Underwater Lethal Company, I think it's a good example of a game using the typical Friendslop formula and doing something cool with it. Yeah, the exploration sections aren't that different from normal, aside from the controls, but the submarine sections are fully unique, at least in the genre, and that one thing gives me a reason to play it. I mean, it's also fun, but that's besides the point. Same with REPO, it has the Fizz Gun, which is a reason for me to play it over Lethal Company. Yapyap has the spells, so again, good reason to play it. Hell, Content Warning's video recording system is good enough reason for me to play it over something else. Just having one interesting, unique mechanic is enough for me to say it's worth checking these games out. There's more games I could go over here, but I think you get the idea at this point. Uniqueness and fun are what I think separates a good co-op horror game from the simple Friendslop label, and I think for the most part, every game I covered in this video is a good game. The only real exceptions are Pit of Goblin and ZORT, but even then, I think Pit of Goblin at least has a good concept behind it. Of course, just because I think these things are what goes into a good Lethal-like, that doesn't mean you will. At the end of the day, these are just silly co-op games, so it's important to remember that your experience is dependent on the people you play with. Still, I think there's something to be said about why the term Friendslop even exists, and that's because of games like ZORT, which suck and feel like they were only made to cash in on trends. But for every game like ZORT, there's games like KLETKA, REPO, or even Murky Divers, which are actually doing cool and unique things, or at least using the basic formula in interesting ways. And as long as there's games like that coming out, I think co-op horror games, whatever you want to call them, have a great future. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Whether you agree with my opinions or not, I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on these silly co-op games. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe out there, and good night.